Last night we had a wonderful keynote address delivered by Dr. Ulysses Dietz from the Newark Museum on all the facets, shall we say, of jewelry and its meaning, its making, and its significance in society. It was really quite wonderful. Today we're going to follow up, continuing on the theme of this 25th annual Parsons Cooper Hewitt Graduate Student Symposium of showing off, design and ostentation. I am Ethan Robey, the Associate Director of the Master's Program in the History of Design and Curatorial Studies, jointly run by Parsons and Cooper Hewitt, the Smithsonian Design Museum. And I am pleased to welcome 6 scholars of varying aspects of design, design history, material culture, art history, and other related fields from universities across the nation to talk about the larger theme of ostentation from the Renaissance to the mid-20th century, and what promised to be a really exciting series of papers. I hope you can join us today for the first, rather this morning for the first 3, and then after lunch for the final 3. So after the talks, we will have the speakers be available for discussion. Small enough group here, we can do an informal discussion about that. We'll have microphones passed around, but do think about how you want to engage with design as we present it. So without further ado then, let me introduce our first speaker, Kat Buckley, who comes to us from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, where she is earning her master's degree in, it's a master's in modern and contemporary art history. She did her undergraduate work at the Maryland Institute College of Art and has also worked at the Barnes Foundation in Philadelphia. Her research focuses on fashion and collecting in fin de siècle Vienna and America, although her paper today will be looking at aspects of fashion and ostentation in Renaissance portraiture. It's entitled Lavinia Fontana, Immortalizing Morality. Sorry, I almost said mortality, but it's morality, right? Yes, okay, so please welcome Kat Buckley.
Hi, everyone. So thank you so much for that lovely introduction. In case you didn't quite get that, my name is Kat Buckley. I'm studying at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. And today I'm presenting on late Renaissance painter Lavinia Fontana. My paper is entitled Immortalizing Morality. Lavinia Fontana was a painter of exceptional and formidable skill, particularly when it came to her depictions of fabric and ornamentation. The nobility of Bologna flocked to her to have her portray them bedecked in their silk, jewels, and lace. She solidified her place in Bologna's society through her considerable skill in painting and became somewhat coveted as both a friend and a creator. In this paper, I will focus on Lavinia Fontana's portraits of noblewomen and their place in society as conveyed through dress. By means of her astute rendering of fabric with painstaking detail, we are able to clearly see the many elements of late Renaissance dress in northern Italy. It is important to situate Fontana in Bolognese society during the Counter-Reformation. As a woman painter during this time period was indeed a rare thing, examining her origins shows how she came to occupy the prominent position she eventually did. Fontana was born in Bologna to her father, painter Prospero Fontana, and her mother, Antonia de Bernardis, a typographer. While her birthday is unknown, she was baptized on August 24th, 1552. Lavinia was the couple's only child who lived past the age of 5. Little is known regarding her upbringing, aside from the fact that her father, Prospero, played a prominent role in her life. Behind me is a painting done by Prospero Fontana, just so you have an idea that he was an artist as well. Of the few female Renaissance painters whose names are known to us today, many of them trained under their fathers. Lavinia Fontana was not an exception to this precedent. Prospero pushed Lavinia toward the art of painting, or else she may not have painted at all. Aside from teaching her to paint, Prospero ensured that his daughter received a stellar education. Lavinia was a musician who was also able to read Latin. Prospero also had a hand in his daughter's marriage. As scholar Caroline P. Murphy has noted, quote, Prospero Fontana recognized that in order for a woman to work in the public eye without the buffers provided by court or convent that would allow her to exist in an honorable state, she required a husband, unquote. While the Fontanas were not wealthy, Prospero saw great future earnings in his daughter and did not want to remove her from his household for a fear of the loss of potential income. This presented a conundrum, as Bolognese women were expected to move in with their spouse after marriage. Fontana married her neighbor, another painter, in part at the urgings of her father. His name was John Paolo Zappi. Zappi actually moved in with the Fontana household so as to not break the family apart, thereby allowing Lavinia Fontana to continue training under her father's tutelage. Prior to marrying Zappi, Fontana painted a portrait of herself, seen here, as a wedding gift. Her self-portrait at the spinet, accompanied by a handmaiden, depicts all that is important to the identity of the painter. She was intent on playing music, but shows her easel in the background. While not quite a visual puzzle of the sort that was often employed in the depiction of scholarly noblewomen, this picture does fit in with other portrait conventions, showing off Fontana's erudition while enforcing important aspects of her personality. Scholar Catherine A. McIver has written on this painting, saying, quote, hers, Lavinia's, is a subtle form of self-promotion, reflecting the two commonly held ideals that a woman artist is a marvel and a beautiful woman is a marvel of nature. Lavinia, unquote. Lavinia Fontana identifies herself not only as a marvel, but as a gentle donna. She wears a lovely Renaissance outfit, although not quite as sumptuous as those she would come to represent for her noble clientele. The instrument she sits at, which is known as a spinet, I thought might be important for everyone to hear. I was able to find this lovely video via YouTube, which just happens to feature the portrait. Fontana, a devout Catholic, eventually bore 11 children, many within the first years of her marriage. In this respect, Fontana acted within the confines of the Counter-Reformation. She was traditional in her style and dress, as per her adherence to religion dictated. This did extend to her career, which she often felt conflicted over. To this end, she said she intended to explore the modern awareness of the value that culture might have for women, provided it was kept within the order of norms. During her early career, Fontana painted many religious scenes and imagery. It would be remiss not to mention these, but they are not the focus of my paper. Many of Fontana's early paintings were given away or sold at extremely low prices, a strategy that boosted her popularity and was devised by her father. The publicity was indeed a success, and resulted in several major commissions from the church during 1584, as well as by other nobility. Fontana quickly became an in-demand portraitist. Thus, Lavinia Fontana entered her trajectory of depicting women in the best garments they could offer when they sat for her. She represented her clients in every life moment, from betrothal to pregnancy, which often saw patrons commissioning devotional images, to even mourning at the passing of a spouse. Each of these portraits assisted her patrons in solidifying their place in late Renaissance Bologna as being the most fashionable and morally devout women in the city. Bologna was a rare sort of European city at this time period, as it did not have a court exerting influence over it. Thus, there was no first family for the citizens to imitate. The nobility of Bologna clamored to fill the vacuous space left by this lack of a royal family, and the surest way to solidify their place as fashionable members of the first class was through portraiture. However, the nobility of Bologna often ran against the so-called sumptuary laws, passed in the early 1500s in many areas of Italy. These were in the earliest stages of being repealed while Lavinia Fontana was busy immortalizing the city's upper classes. Venice, Italy had similar sumptuary laws that, according to fashion historian Jennifer Haraguchi, quote, criticized the opulent dress and extravagant trends in local women's fashion, unquote. Furthermore, literature was involved in the policing of fashion as well. As historian Elizabeth Curie writes, quote, from the end of the 15th century and throughout the 16th, a large number of books were published in Italy, giving guidelines for all aspects of correct behavior, often with a particular emphasis on dress, unquote. Fontana was careful to observe these laws and unofficial codes. Thus, the women she depicts are immortals with morals. There is perhaps no better example of Fontana adhering to this fine line, displaying the wealth of her patrons and distinctly separating them from the lower classes while adhering to sumptuary laws than the painting behind me, Costanza Isolani with courtyard in background. Laws passed as recently as 1570 had banned gold embroidered cloth in nearly all jewelry. Furthermore, women could wear no more than 2 necklaces. In 1580, however, repeals and concessions were made to these laws, allowing for the wearing of 2 necklaces, provided that one of them was a cross. Indeed, upon closer inspection, Costanza Isolani is wearing a crucifix necklace in addition to her pearls, which we learned about last night a bit with Mr. Dietz's presentation. Pearls were laden with symbolism in the Renaissance and were valued and used more extensively than any other jewel. They would see a revival in 18th century France when troubadour, a style based on medieval clothing, was made popular through Empress Josephine de Beauharnais, and the pearl, her favorite jewel, went fashionably along with this trend. Not only do Fontana's paintings attest to the popularity of pearls in 16th century Bologna, but we can look to another source to confirm this as well. The long admired degli abiti antichi et moderni de diversi parti del mondo libri due, or Of Ancient and Modern Dress of Diverse Parts of the World in 2 books, by Cesare Vecellio, attests to this. Alongside his illustration of the Donna Bolognese nobile di condizione, or the terms of the Bolognese noblewomen, he writes, quote, the Bolognese gentlewomen are gracious and well-dressed, and they take their hairstyles from the Milanese. They make their hair curly from the front, which they ornament with large pearls, and with a point of a veil of netted white silk. It can be useful to compare Vecellio's Donna Bolognese nobile with Fontana's Costanza Isolani. It can be assumed that Vecellio's woodcut was made earlier than Lavinia Fontana's painting, as Abiti Antichi was published in 1590, and with its hundreds of woodcuts, and given the fact that Vecellio was working as a publisher by 1570, it is likely that he began the illustrations for his magnum opus by 1580 at the latest. This may account for some of the subtle variations between the 2 portraits, such as the fallen collar of Costanza Isolani. Still, similarities between the 2 pictures abound. Both portray a slashed garment, where the outer skirt has been cut to reveal an undergarment of sorts. This type of fashion thrived in Renaissance painting. Art historian Carol Collier-Frick writes that, quote, extremely slashed garments, especially in the sleeves and breeches, but also in bodices, were sartorial status symbols of the wealthiest ranks and eventually influenced the motifs of silk production, unquote. Bologna was a center for silk production, so it is natural that Costanza Isolani, roundly praised as one of the most beautiful women in Bologna, wears this garment in Fontana's portrait of her. The veil Isolani wears is also of silk, but it is gold instead of white. It was extremely important for Fontana to emphasize every asset that she could of Isolani. As Jennifer Haraguchi has noted, quote, in defining the culture of the Renaissance as one of display, art historians explain that the social identity and prestige of nobility depended on the magnificent presentation of elaborate dress and ornamentation. Many images in portraits and costume books provide visible evidence of the desire of Renaissance noblewomen and men to make dramatic public displays of their clothing and jewelry. Fontana continued in this grand tradition and ensured that her patrons' most valuable and legal assets were depicted in their full glory. This is something she would repeat in her portrait of Isabella Rivini. Rivini wears a lace collar, similar to Costanza Isolani's, but much more sumptuous. Lace collars and ruff were integral to the fashionable nobility in Bologna during this time period. Arcangelo Passarotti designed a lace impresa for Isabella Rivini in his lace pattern book from this time. Lace also showed off how nobility could afford to import their clothing, as the centers for lace production laid outside of Bologna in Venice. Another accessory that cannot go unnoticed is Rivini's necklace, which has sapphires, rubies, and pearls. It has been noted as one of Fontana's most lavish pieces of jewelry that any sitter for her ever wore. The jewels are rendered individually and impeccably. I thought it might be nice for everyone to see a brief example of lace, Venetian lace, as it exists today. This one comes from the Art Institute of Chicago, but it is from roughly the same time period when Lavinia Fontana was painting. So you can compare the actual textile object to the depictions and renderings that we're seeing today. Later, Fontana would depict Isabella Rivini as Venus, using her original portrait as a clear reference. The hair color and style, and even the turn of Rivini's face, is almost exactly the same. However, in Isabella Rivini as Venus, Rivini is shown nearly nude, with a very gauzy, gossamer fabric barely concealing her features. It is draped around her body almost as if it were a second skin. Fontana drapes Rivini as Venus in a blue shawl, continuing in the long tradition of depicting goddesses in Grecian garments of a single fabric. By depicting her patron as Venus, Fontana played with the long-standing tradition of classical revivalism in Renaissance art, and thus depicting Rivini nearly nude could be permitted. Once she ceased to be Isabella Rivini, patron of Lavinia Fontana, and instead slipped into the skin of Venus, portraying her nude did not go against public morality. The betrothal was an especially important occasion in the life of Bolognese nobility. Brides, in addition to being given to their husband with a dowry, came with a plethora of jewels, luxurious fabrics, paintings, and furniture. Together, the gifts of the bride formed the credo, a large amount of luxurious materials and riches that would be added to the dowry. The credo technically never belonged to the bride herself, but always to her family before marriage and to her husband after. Ultimately, the bride's dress signified the family's wealth, and during these multi-day celebrations, attempts to enforce sumptuary laws were ignored entirely. In addition to the expected ostentation and display from the bridal family, marriage was seen as the very basis of civic morality. Occasionally, portraits were commissioned to observe the bride dressed in the most ornate fashion, and these pictures would enhance the credi through adding to their trove of material riches. It was to observe one of these matrimonial ceremonies that Fontana painted Portrait of a Young Woman. While the young woman's identity is unknown, her gown showcases Bologna noble fashion at its finest. Red was the color of choice for an Italian Renaissance gown. Her overdress is embossed red velvet. Although there is lace in many other portraits that Fontana painted, there is none in this one, as it was not a typical credo item. This may be due to the aforementioned fact that Bologna was a center of production for silk, but not lace. The matrimony ceremony, as a citywide celebration, may therefore have been slightly patriotic in tone. One moment here. Cementing the bride's family's place as integral to Bologna's economy and visualizing their prominent position through the bride's gown. The jar around the noblewoman's waist likely held a perfume to ward off fleas. Even her dog, a cane bolognese, exemplifies fashion, as it was a trend among the wealthy in Bologna to own this breed. Other depictions of the cane bolognese can be found in the portrait of Costanza Isolani and in the portrait of Isabella Rivini. Lavinia Fontana depicted her patrons, the nobility of Bologna, as they wished to see themselves. She aggrandized them through dress, but their morality was always of the utmost importance to her. All of her ladies adhered in their depictions to strict sumptuary laws, seemingly forever being enacted and repealed in late Renaissance Italy. She further glorified particular patrons, such as Isabella Rivini, through allegorical myths that furthered their beauty and morals simultaneously. Acting in the role of a woman painter was not an ordinary thing to do in late Renaissance Italy. Lavinia Fontana balanced her life through temperate dress and enthusiastic religiosity. She expected nothing less from the proper women who sat for her. And through her seemingly small rebellious career, her star was catapulted, and Lavinia Fontana herself became a noblewoman by association. Thank you very much for your time.